welcome to our online message for this Palm Sunday, 2024. My name is Deanne Carter and I serve as the pastor of Margarettsville and Lower Granville Baptist Churches. It's nice to have you join with us online today. I wonder if any of you out there have ever felt insignificant, that who you are and what you're able to do is really of very little importance in the scheme of things. Have you ever felt that way? After all, even last week we looked at how James compares us to a mist. We're here for just a short time and then we're gone. What impact could any one of us ever hope to have? Couldn't be much, could it? Or could it? When Jesus was here on earth, he would often use men, women, children, people that society overlooked, exploited, and abused. And he would fulfill his plans and his purposes through them. Remember the poor widow with the 2 copper coins and the lesson that Jesus taught from her seemingly insignificant gift in Luke 21? As Jesus looked up, he saw the rich putting their gifts into the temple treasury. He also saw a poor widow put in 2 very small copper coins. Truly, I tell you, he said, this poor widow has put in more than all the others. All these people have given their gifts out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in all she had to live on. That little bit that the widow was able to give, it wasn't insignificant to Jesus. And she was not insignificant to Jesus either. And how about the little boy with the loaves and the fish? Remember Andrew's words in John 6 when he said, "Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will they go among so many?" And Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in the place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. And Jesus took the loaves, he gave thanks, and he distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. And he did the same with the fish. When they had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them and they filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. Can you imagine the miracle that little boy would have missed if he hadn't have given Jesus his fish and his bread? Can you imagine how he must have felt to have been part of it all? And the lesson he learned about what he had to give wasn't insignificant, as it appeared to the disciple Andrew. It wasn't insignificant to Jesus at all. And that little boy, he wasn't insignificant to Jesus either. So if you're tempted today to think that you are insignificant, that your actions are insignificant to Jesus, that your gifts are too little, that you don't have much to offer, that others always seem to look right past you, and you don't even think much of yourself some days, I want you to be encouraged today. Be encouraged, because you are significant to God, and you may be the one he is going to use today in a mighty way. God takes us as we are, surrendered to him, and he brings about his purposes. Today we're going to reflect on Palm Sunday, the beginning of Holy Week in the Christian calendar. The day in history when Jesus rode into Jerusalem on the back of a donkey, and he fulfilled Zechariah's prophecy. But we're going to look at it from a different point of view this year. We're going to look at it from the point of view of an animal that was quite insignificant to the people, but not insignificant to Jesus. One would think that Jesus would come as a king and he would be riding upon a stallion. But no, his animal of choice, the animal prophesied to be his transport, was a donkey, a very humble donkey. Now, in doing some research on this donkey, I came across a meditation called A Donkey's Tale, and it was written by a pastor named Tim. I'm not sure what his last name was, but he wrote this. And I want to share the story he has written with a few changes and additions with you today as we look at Palm Sunday from a donkey's point of view. And as I read the story, I invite you to use your imaginations and follow along. If you're in any of the live services, you'll see pictures up on the screen that will help you do so. But unfortunately, here online, you're just going to have the story being told, and you'll have to imagine it all in your minds. But I want to invite you today to listen to our Palm Sunday account of the triumphal entry, and it's called A Donkey's Tale. Now, to help you realize that this is the donkey talking, I made a little costume here. So let me get prepared, get my ears up here, and I gotta put my nose on. I haven't lost my mind. This is all in the name of being creative. Okay, there we go. Now, I'm the donkey, in case you hadn't guessed. And I want to share a story with you today, a very important story. While I've been standing around in the marketplace, I've heard the teachers of the law arguing about the king, Zechariah, talked about who would come, humble and riding on a donkey. And I want to stamp my feet and say, he's come, he's come. It's already happened. I was there. But they just think I'm making a noise, and they beat me to keep me quiet. I guess there's no folk so deaf as them who won't listen. Anyway, I'll start at the beginning. I was a very young donkey then, and I spent most of my time next to my mother. When someone needed a donkey to ride or to take their heavy loads, they would take my mom. And they left me behind. In fact, I seemed to spend most of my time tied up in the street, learning to watch what was going on and to listen to the latest gossip. I heard a lot about this man called Jesus and the great things that he was doing, but I didn't really understand it all. Not then. At least not until two men I had never seen before came and untied me. I learned later that they were Jesus' disciples. Now, I know one thing you should never do is go with strangers. So I started to make a fuss. And when my owner heard me, he could hardly fail to miss the racket, hee-haw, hee-haw, hee-haw. Of course, he came out to see what was going on. And what the two men said was really strange. They said, the Lord needs it, and we will send it back very shortly. And do you know what? My master simply said, that's okay then. Just like that, it was only much later that I realized he was already a follower of Jesus. So there I was being led off by these two strangers, away from my mom for the very first time and out of the city walls. And I can tell you I was more than a little scared. I guess many donkeys would have just put their hooves down and refused to go any further. But I have to say, I was kind of excited what was going on. I couldn't hear all that the two men were talking about, but they seemed to be excited about this man Jesus too. And they were expecting something to happen, something very big, very soon. So why did they need me, a little donkey, after all? I was about to find out. Now, the road out of Jerusalem went down through a little valley, and then up the other side through cemeteries and olive groves until we reached a small village called Bethage. I imagined that I was just going to meet this man Jesus and maybe a couple of his friends. What I didn't expect were the crowds. There were hundreds of people everywhere. Men and women and boys and girls and short, fat people and tall, thin people. And they were all crowded around this one person who was talking about something called the kingdom of God. And he was like a still point in the middle of a storm, perfectly calm in the middle of a jostling, pushing, noisy crowd. And as the two men led me to him, I knew in my very young heart that somehow everything was going to be all right. He turned to me, he smiled, and he placed his reassuring hand on my back. Suddenly the noise of the crowds, the shouts, the questions, the laughter, they no longer scared me. So long as he was with me, I would be able to manage. So he swings himself up onto my back. Now, I'd never been ridden before, and I thought the weight would be too heavy. But he turns out to be surprisingly light and easy on me, and I slowly start to walk back the way that I've come. Some of his friends stay with him, but what I don't realize is what the crowds are about to do. When Jesus got on my back, he was presenting himself as Israel's promised king. By this action, he was saying, "Behold, the king cometh unto thee." And the Jews, well, they knew their Bibles. So many people in the crowd would have remembered the words of Zechariah and recognized what Jesus was doing. Some of them may have even remembered that when Solomon became Israel's king, he was presented on the donkey of his father David. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is the people of Jerusalem, they recognized this when they saw Jesus riding on my back, the foal of a donkey. And they said, "Hosanna, Hosanna to the Son of David." I was carrying the king. Little old me doing this important deed. Well, the people ran on down the hill in front of me, and they started taking the branches off the trees, and they lined the route, waving and cheering. Some of them took off their long outer robes, and they placed them on the ground for me to walk on. It felt like a dream, it really did. What was I, a beast of burden, doing in a procession like this, carrying King Jesus? But no, it's really happening. And there are more people coming out of Jerusalem to meet Jesus. And what is this they're shouting? They're shouting, "Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna." They continue to lay their cloaks and the palm branches down on the ground, and I walk on them as I carry Jesus. For here at last is the king Zechariah wrote about all those years ago when he said, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, daughter of Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and having salvation, gentle and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." So here I am with this man, Jesus. He's on my back. And as we approach this vast, magnificent walls, the crowds seem to be getting thicker and thicker. And I tell you, it's quite some squeeze getting in through the city gate. There are times when I can barely see where I'm going, and I have to bellow really loudly to make the people move out of the way. Ee-ah, ee-ah. But is everyone so enthusiastic? As we make our way up to the Temple Mount, there are some well-dressed people, some men, and they push themselves to the front of the crowd and they tell Jesus to keep the crowds quiet. They say, "Teacher, rebuke the disciples, your disciples." Now, that's a funny thing to say, don't you think? And you know what Jesus says? He says, "I tell you, if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out." I can tell they're not pleased with his answer. And they storm off with a look of hatred and grumbling among themselves. And it seems that these people, they don't want Jesus to be their king. Well, very soon we're outside of the temple itself. And the huge, wonderful temple that Herod has only recently finished building is right there. And Jesus gets off my back. He gives me a pat, and I'm led away. But in my mind's eye, I'm still thinking about those teachers of the law and wondering what they will do about Jesus. Especially when later on I hear that he has gone into the temple and he's turned over all the money-changing stalls and set all the birds for the sacrifice free. It's been a wonderful, tiring day. But as I go to sleep that night, I can't help but think and see there's going to be trouble. You know, as I look back on that day, I never would have imagined that I would be chosen to carry Jesus into Jerusalem. Out of all the cults around, it was me that Jesus sent for. It was me that was to help him fulfill his mission. And it was little old me that helped to fulfill the prophecy. As Jesus got on my back and we started off for Jerusalem, I was a little scared, but I knew he was with me and I knew it would be okay. And I was really happy to be helping him out. You know, when God has a plan, and he does, because it says in Jeremiah 29:11, it says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." You know, we only have to be obedient and open to his plan, and he can use us in ways that we would never imagine. Look how young I was. I never even had anybody on my back before, and yet I was able because it was Jesus who called. Now, you might feel inadequate. You might feel too inexperienced, too old to do what God's Spirit is nudging you to do, but trust me, you're not. Because with God, all things are possible. I hope you know this. I hope you remember it the next time God comes to you with a plan and he wants your help. It sure changed my life. And you know, another thing I remember about that week was the crowds. So many people. People tend to forget there were crowds all throughout Jerusalem at that time because of the Passover festival. They were everywhere, and the whole place was filled with strange smells and sights and sounds. But what struck me was the way the crowd they slowly began to turn on Jesus. Can you imagine? They had recognized Jesus as their king. But this King Jesus wasn't doing what they wanted. They wanted him to free them from the Romans and give them back their country to make them all rich and happy. But instead, he was teaching in the temple about loving the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and strength, and loving your neighbor as yourself. And they just didn't want to know this stuff. This wasn't what they wanted. They didn't want this kind of king. So, little by little, day by day, the crowd began to listen to the teachers of the law who wanted to kill him, who wanted to do away with him. And so little by little, day by day over the week, their chants turned from Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna to crucify, crucify, crucify. This is where we're going to pause for today. And this week, we are on our way to the cross. And on Friday, we're going to focus on what happened there. If you're able to join with us for our services, we meet at 2 p.m. in Lower Granville and 7 p.m. in Margarettsville. Take care and have a blessed Easter week. God bless.